Once upon a time, there was a woman. Some knew her as Gotami, a woman so thin that she then became known as Kissa Gotami, meaning skinny Gotami. She's best known for a story in which the Buddha tasked her with finding mustard seed, the most common seed of all, but from a house in which no one had ever died. Well, in old cultures, there aren't any houses like that. Buddha told Gotami that her search would provide the medicine to heal her dead son, whom she just couldn't believe was dead. Buddha's skillful means led Gotami to recognize the universality of death. She became a nun. Later, she became known as Kisa Gotami Thera. Thera, an honorific denoting teacher, though sometimes the stories about her have been attributed to Patakara, as if even the Pali Canon can't keep them straight. But her names don't really matter. What matters are the stories, even the unorthodox versions. For these old stories that speak to the soul are gifts of the dead meant for the living, a cultural inheritance being passed down. And the stories of her, whatever her name, always have to do with loss, the presence of death, and what can outshine them. And in this way, the stories about Kissa Gotami are not so different from the stories told of Persephone or Inanna. But compared to India, Greece, and Mesopotamia, America's culture is quite young and lacks spiritual stories like this. Those who are young can feel bulletproof with a diminished awareness of mortality. But with the license granted to poets, since it's nothing I can prove, let me tell a version of her story like this, and in her own words. The recent death of my husband seemed a loss too large to bear alone. So I set off with my 2 children to the province where I had kin. The trudge was slow, for I had to carry my infant daughter on my back, while the stride of my 3-year-old son was halting and barely half the length of my own. We then came to a river. It was spring, and the snow melt from the Himalayas left the river running higher than I remembered. So I instructed my son to wait for my return while I carried my infant daughter to the farther shore and left her there. So far, all this, and my life itself, had seemed doable. But as I waded closer back to him, he reached out his hands crying, "Mama!" then stumbled toward me into the river. I was so close, just a few steps away, but the river of life took my son faster than I could swim. Desperately, I tried to at least follow him with my eyes. Then his head disappeared, while I could hear the raging falls just below. He was gone. What choice did I have but to accept what I didn't have time to grieve? For my one thought now was to return to my daughter. Thank the Buddha, I thought, for I could still see her patiently waiting. So I focused now on the roiling water I was in, feeling for footholds. And that's when the full horror life can be appeared. For when I glanced up, my darling daughter was being carried away, not by the river, but a tiger. At that moment, I shattered into 1,000 pieces. No part of me knew how to hold or make sense of this. I went stark raving mad. And when I stumbled into my village, no one else knew what to do for the shattered self I'd become. I'd become an alien creature, beyond my remaining family's frame of reference, for nothing alive now seemed real. The village children seemed only ghosts of grief. I myself had become a ghost, empty of selfhood, and most villagers considered me neither animal nor person, but an omen or bringer of bad luck. I had lost everything. Even the ability to care again for anything, even myself. But when the light goes out in one room, doesn't it begin to shine in another? For in falling apart, I'd also fallen into the care of the Buddha's Sangha. They alone held me in their gaze without turning away. And I cry now in remembering their kindness, for they included me in their communal morning and noon meals, and even in the medicine meal of a piece of fruit at sundown. After a time, one of the women in the community taught me to meditate. And though it didn't happen overnight, I'd begun to be here for my grief, not just as it, if only for seconds at a time at first. Slowly, I was beginning to molt from being life's tragic victim and had begun to find refuge in the community. The teachings of the Buddha provided an alternative form of emptiness. They called it shunyata. At first I assumed it to be some kind of lifeless void, and later, maybe a high-minded abstract experience meant only for the arahants. But with some pointing out, I came to recognize it as an ever-present spaciousness lurking before and after each of my thoughts, and that rather than fear or quest for it, I could simply rest in it. What peace! This alone would have been enough. But one day, seemingly no different from any other, a great and blinding light erupted, and as it did, I somehow knew that it had always been. The light that had always been lit up the sky, my mind, and everything on earth. And though there was nothing about this I could understand, for days after, I laughed and cried a lot, and wondered if I'd just fallen into a new kind of crazy. But when I could rouse a voice to speak of this to one of the woman teachers, she firmly took my head into her hands, gazed into my eyes, and then broke into laughter, saying, "Oh, Gotami, this is wonderful. May you take this holy crazy to your grave." In truth, my old self and its world had already died, and both reborn as something new, for I both saw and was seen differently by others too. I'd become the grandmother to all, and they even made crazy Gotama into a teacher. From there, the years flew by like arrows that failed to harm me, for some part of me had become untinged even by death, and I, Kissa Gotami Thera, my heart well released, attest to what is said here. In some way, Spiritual biographies that we recall are not solely the stories about a single person once upon a time. Whenever we hear once upon a time at the beginning of a story, we're about to hear a timeless story. We're being seduced into something that could actually pertain to now. We're being bamboozled for our own good. Likewise, spiritual biographies are not just the stories of individuals. They're part of the human story and evocative reminders of the transformational potential residing in us all. Nothing is diminished about Kissa Gotami Thera if she inspires a poet or two from her grave. That's what ancestors are for. Just as in traditional cultures, long before the invention of the printing press, it was the task of the bard to remember the stories, legends, and myths of that culture, and then tell the right story at the needed time. And whether in storytelling or comedy, timing is everything. Each of us should feel free to tell and retell the stories we hear, but try to tell a good one if you can. One that landed in you and then wanted to stay and later be shared. Cultures become denuded and rent apart when they lack the stories that need to be told. The Buddha told a good one to Kissa Gotami. His was a benevolent seduction, as good stories can be, and she, in turn, has left one for us. Like Kissa Gotami, we, the people of whatever nation, have been facing challenging conditions forever, and aren't we all in need of some good stories now?